We are students of the art of play,
And we do this show called The Art of Play.
a show for the players who ask why.
I'm Vi.
And I'm Gaia.
Hey Gaia, what are we talking about today?
So today we're moving into our last major topic for this season, possibly for the show as overall. We're going to be talking about how do you be a good player in games. I kind of want to call back to a lot of our previous episodes, and we've constantly talked about you, the listener, as a player. How do you get more enjoyment from your games? What are the different ways you interact with the games? What types of psychology or game systems you interact with? Where are you on Bartle's taxonomy?
How do you communicate what you like about games to other people?
Yeah, what aspects of games are worth talking about? But what we haven't really talked about outside of the concept of like multiplayer games is that you as the player are an aspect of the game, right? You're fundamentally a piece of the game, and your enjoyment from the game comes from its interaction with you as a piece of the game.
And different from a lot of other games and even like interacting with other forms of narratives like books and TV and that sort of thing is that your PC is a dynamic, changeable thing. And that change is something you control as the player that you don't experience in other mediums. And it's actually something that makes RPGs the most rewarding.
Yeah, and even adding on to this, there are tons of other games where they're either multiplayer or cooperative that we've talked about to some degree already, where your interactions with the other players are fundamentally the reason why you're playing the game. They're what you get from the game.
Yeah.
So you are a piece of the game that everybody else has to interact with. So for today's episode, we're going to be talking about how do you be a good player or a bad player in games? How can you, as a piece of the game, make the game more enjoyable for yourself and for others?
I think broadly, I want to start this by just saying that any sort of introspection that you do to try to be a better player makes you a good player, right? If every time you play a game and you walk away from it and you kind of go, oh, I wonder if I had done this differently, and I don't mean mechanically. I don't mean I wish I had cast this spell earlier. If I had made a different decision as a player, to continue with a little bit of RP, or did I get uncomfortable because of, something that I need to work on that wasn't in service to the story? One of my favorite, I'm a Brennan Lee Mulligan enjoyer.
I think that much is clear.
That much is clear. In an Adventuring Academy episode, he talks about how when he is a player in a campaign, he always he likes to start thinking about characters in what's going to serve the story best, right? What is the most interesting choice you can make as a character to move the DM's story forward, right? So having those conversations with your DM that are like, what are you hoping to, not if not achieve, but like, what are you hoping to explore in this narrative, right? If other people have things that they're interested in, where do I fit to help you connect the dots?
Yeah. And I really want to say this is distinctly different from how do I become more skilled at something.
Yes.
Right? Of course, if you want to become more skilled at like an e-sport, like, I don't know, League of Legends, the worst possible option, right?
This is distinctly different.
You play, you just go through the motions. But this is more, how can you change your behavior, your thoughts, your actions, your scheduling, whatever, to better enjoy the game and ensure that others are enjoying the game better too?
It feels a lot more like learning how to be a better improviser and a better actor because it's very like person-based, right? And you're working really collaboratively, which is a skill that you do need to develop, but it's distinctly different from sort of practicing the same thing over and over again, right? It's fundamentally different. So a lot of what I'm going to bring to this episode, aside from just like discussions and personal thoughts, again, comes from the Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide by James DeMatteo. Great. I've learned that he's written 2 other books that I'm very excited to read. But this book is so solid. And we're specifically going to focus on the chapters. I don't have the number of the chapters here, but they are Making Choices Important, Engagement, and Playing to Change.
Yeah, and I'm going to be bringing up some stuff from our previous episodes on Bartle's taxonomy, as well as a few other aspects, and talk about motivations, right? So a big thing for me is what motivates you as a player. Why do you play games in the first place, and how can you use this to make games more enjoyable? I'm also going to be talking about way more general stuff, such as from within D&D of like what practices within tabletop RPGs, and as well multiplayer games and Discord games and interacting with friend groups can you do to make the whole thing more enjoyable.
Yeah, what habits, that might actually be a really good place to start. What habits do you have as a player that would make you a good player versus a bad player? And again, good and bad is a really like black and white way to see this, but what makes you a player that people are excited to play with versus a player that, maybe needs some work?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And just as a note for my sources, I'm going to be pulling a lot of material that I've just learned from my own experiences over time and that I read from like on Reddit and other forums when I myself was asking how to be a better player. But I am also going to pull some material from my human-computer interaction course that I just wrote the exam for yesterday.
So it's just right there. It's primed.
Right there.
Yeah.
I took this course at the University of New Brunswick with Professor Connor Wilson, and huge shout out to him. He is a great lecturer and has covered a lot of this material well. He uses the textbook Designing User Experience, A Guide to HCI UX and Interaction Design by David Benyon, Benyon. That's not a common name. We're going to be talking about self-determinism theory as well in here, and I don't know if he pulled that directly from the textbook or other sources. Can't, within 5 seconds, figure out where he pulled it. So just as a note, I'm going to be pulling from a lot of different material in that way. But I'm going to throw it over to you, Vi, if you want to kind of start on your experiences, how to be a better player.
Yeah, I think I want to talk about habits because I know that you have some habits, and I do too, that fit on both of these spectrums, I'll say. Like, I think this is something that it's like easier to see when people are doing a good thing when you're not the one doing it, and it's easy to like be critical of yourself. So a good player, if I'm DMing something and I'm starting a game or am like looking for feedback on what to prep, good players are always the ones who like come with an offer, right? They don't come empty-handed. They go, I'm just going to throw some spaghetti at a wall. What if this? What if we explore this? Are we interested in, oh, did you not like that?
I was like reading my notes, preparing for when I jump in next. And I was like, wait, spaghetti at the wall? And then I mentally had an image of just splat. And I was like, oh.
Yeah,
ooh.
To see if it's done, to see what sticks.
Your spaghetti should not be sticking to a wall.
Yeah, not if you're going to eat it. This is the test to see
Please
if it's ready.
Please do not put your edibles on the walls.
Anyway, so people who bring offerings to the table are always the best. And then, the same thing that goes for all, like being a friend, being a good coworker. If you're responsive, receptive, all of those things are good. But players who are visibly passionate about a game, they are so much more pleasant to DM for because you know that they're engaged in what you want, right? And when people are good at like being critical about what is happening in a game and like what the next steps are, it can be a lot easier and more enjoyable as a DM to also be thinking that way, right? Of like, what's the best next step, right? And what do the players want to see next?
I think of it similarly in video games of when my friend group and I launch up Stardew Valley, one of the first things that my friends will ask me, because I'm the organizer of the group and I've always been the organizer of the group, much to my
forever DM.
I'm a forever DM in Stardew Valley. What does that even mean?
Oh God, what a t-shirt.
But when we launch up the game, the first thing that the other people ask me is, oh, what's the plan? What are we doing next? And they know that I always know what the next major goal should be. It's building this thing or upgrading this thing or reaching this like stretch goal or getting these items, right? And I'll always say, okay, we need these things. Everybody who has preferences, please go do them. If you don't know which one you should do, ask me. And like, because like we launched up yesterday and we played for like 7 hours straight yesterday. We're going to ignore the fact that it's immensely unhealthy. And they were like, what are we doing? I'm like, okay, well, we need to upgrade our shed to produce a lot more artisan goods. I want to do a Skull Cavern run. We need to finish a couple bundles that are only available right now. And we need to build some horse stables on the farm, which means we need 800 hardwood, which takes forever.
Yeah.
We had one guy who for 6 of those 7 hours was straight just cutting wood.
Yeah, I think this is, again, like, as a player group, it can be really nice to delegate different tasks. Right?
Yeah.
This is the like, have somebody be the group treasurer, right? Whoever manages the bag of holding, you're managing the inventory for that, right?
The whole inventory,
the whole thing,
yours.
Right? You like taking responsibility for certain things that are happening. And I'll say even on like a smaller scale, like in combat, making sure that the DM remembers that like, hey, Spirit Guardians is up, or I have a condition, right? Like keeping track of your spell conditions and stuff like that and concentration is so important for the players to do to keep the DM honest, but also it's really helpful as a DM to just be reminded of those things, right? Just like kindly, right? In a normal way of like, hey, I have that ward up, so that's half damage. And the DM will be like, yep. So, 50 becomes 25. Moving on.
Yeah. And that's the exact thing you were mentioning of making sure players bring things to the table, are aware, have their ideas, are keeping track of what's going on. That is so useful in games, especially because let's call back to me doing Stardew Valley yesterday. We're organizing with my friends, and they're asking me what we need to do. I'm taking the DM role of organizing everything.
Yeah.
And I think at one point, I'm gonna create an example story that's not exactly what happened, but just to give like an example for the talking. I had one person,
hypothetical.
Yeah. One person asking me, "Hey, how do I do this thing that I need to do?" And I'm sitting there organizing the whole farm.
Yeah.
Actually, I think at that point I'm in like the mines, let's say, like making calls because I have another person with me and we're dropping bombs for the mining purpose because in Stardew Valley that's really useful. So we're both at high risk of death nonstop. And this friend's asking me how to do something, and my literal reply is just something like, "You're going to have to look this up on the wiki. I cannot organize at the moment."
Yeah.
And that's when the other friend who was doing all that wood cutting jumped in and started explaining it to them.
Yeah.
Because I was making calls trying not to die.
This is a really good communication thing of like, don't just say yes because you could, right? Can you at that moment help, right? Like, I'm going back and re-watching some of the early like D20 seasons, and it's so clear when they have like new players sitting next to like capable players, right? And like in the first couple episodes, they're like, what does this mean, right? They're handing spell cards over to the other person, or the more experienced player will like lean over and just be like, that's this skill that you need to roll, right? Not in an intrusive way, just like, I'm helping when you want help.
You have a guide, you have a coach.
Yeah. But it's really important that if that person who is supposed to be helping you just needs a second because they're trying to figure out what they need to do, just saying like, oh, hang on, I need a minute. Communicating really clearly what they're capable of helping with at that time. Especially if you're starting a new game and you're bringing in people who have never played D&D before, right? As a DM, really helpful to like walk through your character creation with that other person, because we've talked about this. That's like a super complicated task to be like, build a character. It's like, I don't know how to do that. It's like, okay, let's just talk about the kind of person you want to play, and we'll stat them the way that I think they should be like statted, right? We'll give them feats that are appropriate and backgrounds and whatever, but we can always come back to it and change it, right? We can go respec your whole character if we want to at some point.
I've done that with players who like a few sessions in, they're like, I'm really not enjoying this aspect. I'm like, well, why don't we just change your subclass to one that you'll enjoy more?
Yeah. Or just like, hey, I've been playing a bard for 6 levels and they actually aren't really a bard anymore, right? Like they've taken a wholesale switch in how they approach situations, and I still think of them as a caster, but I don't really think of them as somebody who is like inspired by the creative process, right? Okay, let's make them something else.
Rules as written, that's what downtime's for.
Yeah. But like you can go back and just be flexible. So when we talk about what makes a good player, having a good DM can make you a much better player. Which is a wild thing to say. And there are systems where we kind of talk about D&D specifically because we both play it, but there's other systems where you don't have DMs. So really the question is like, what makes a good player? Having a good group, right?
Yeah, I almost want to like, because we're talking quite a bit now about being aware of the game, being aware of your character, being aware of your spells, and people helping each other who need it.
Yeah.
Right? But this level of awareness of you're engaged trying to contribute to the group as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
And when you are struggling to contribute, you ask for assistance appropriately.
Yeah.
So I have a story written in my notes.
Sure.
I have a series of stories that I have not sent Vi for those listening that I'm just going to shock her with, because I don't think you were involved in any of these stories.
Probably
these are
not.
different D&D games
Yeah.
that I DM'd. I remember I played a game where I had all my characters in an old like desert area, right? They were supposed to be saving a city that was currently being attacked and under siege. Like the siege had broken into the city. They're coming into the city while it's being invaded to stop the invading force in its tracks. Kind of like a this city falls if they fail kind of thing.
Right.
And
really high stakes.
Yeah, I had about 4 players in this game. And what ended up happening here is 2 or 3 of the players were basically completely spaced out the entire time, right? Like it would come to their turn, and they would have nothing prepared, and they would have to like refocus in what they have to do for their turn, right? They'd be like, oh, what's currently happening? Where currently are we? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And so I would have to explain it every time, and they weren't aware of certain situations that would lead them into very, very dangerous scenarios.
Yeah, or the problem with like like if you have any mystery element of something and you're telling them clues and then they go to try to piece some stuff together and then they weren't paying attention for part of it and it's like, oh, you have that information though.
Yeah, like you're missing key information.
Yeah.
And it became actually a big problem because as the game dragged on, everyone was not like paying attention when their turns came around. As I said, like they were trying to figure out what they were supposed to do. They were interacting with things wrong. And then when like the big reveal happened, which was a massive dragon coming down that they had to fight, everyone was kind of shocked. Like, wait, why is there a dragon? Except for that one player who was like, guys,
of course there's a dragon.
Fire everywhere, right? Like the city's being burned and the enemies that we're fighting are fire demons. Yeah. Like this is an invasion for something way stronger than a person.
Yeah.
Right? And then there was like... Yeah, so like we had like one engaged player and me, and then two players who were not engaged at all, and one who was kind of switching between.
Yeah,
right. And this
is something that happened to me in a game that I played, and this was like a long-term game that we like were playing every week. But what was happening is when I came to the table, we were all very like involved in sessions and like only like I like to call this an eyes up playing approach. Like we were engaging with what the DM was telling us and like what was happening in the moment, in a way that like wasn't related to your character sheet or your abilities, right? Playing to play the game to understand the world, to like solve the mystery, and then to use your abilities as like, you know, okay, I'd like to lock pick the door, right? And then just being like, okay, well, do I have knock, right? Like that kind of thing of understanding what you could do, but what's the best thing to do here? And then playing with the table's abilities, right? Like, okay, we have a thief who's really good at lockpicking, or we can break down the door, right? Those are the two things available to us. Let's pick the one that makes the most sense for this scenario. And those were always the best. And then as we continued to play, people would sort of like bring hobbies to the table or like get distracted or play when they were really tired and not like say that they weren't, you know, going to be really engaged. And then it turned into like, you know, people who wanted to play and who were really engaged were playing these sessions in the same way, and then we would have conflict at the table of like your like people who were really engaged were being told that they were like taking over the narrative, and it was like, well, yeah, because nobody else is contributing, right? So if you want to be a good player, right, then being engaged makes your story experience better, right? If you tend to hang back a little bit more, you know, and then you start to distance yourself from what's actually happening at the table, well, of course you're not going to enjoy it.
Yeah, you're here to play a game.
Yeah.
If I can give a more positive example now of players who are engaged with the story, figuring out what's going on and solving problems together. Vi, you are actually part of this story. The story's about you.
Oh.
So Vi was recently in my most recent D&D game, well, 5e game, where they were playing as survivors in a horror scenario.
Yeah.
Right? And there was a point where like they were nearing the end of this session, so they'd encountered numerous enemies. They have a general idea of what's going on, and they've even started to read stories about other enemies they had not encountered yet, other creatures that could attack them. And at one point, there were two of the characters in a main control room trying to figure out how to deal with locks and systems that were in place, and all of a sudden, there's speaking coming from down the stairs, which Vi's character goes to investigate. And she sees this character coming up the stairs who so far is only aware of her because she just saw her, and she was like, oh no.
Yeah.
Because she caught on slower than everyone else because you didn't know about this.
Yeah.
Who this was, and the other two players were aware.
This game is based on a video game, which I hadn't played, but other people had. So
yeah.
As soon as they figured out what the video game was, they were like in on the tropes, and then I was like, I don't know.
So it was way more fun with you. And you were like, okay, this guy has not seen the other people yet. I'm going to run back up and like quickly try to tell them and start baiting that guy away from them so they can escape, because I think I'm the most capable of getting back to the group after.
Yeah.
Right? Which is exactly what happened. And everyone managed to survive this scenario and make it to the next region, which was like, because you were all engaged and working together.
Yeah.
Taya was also in this game, and Taya in particular was coordinating the group who was trying to escape while you did this.
Yeah.
So there was this balance of you and Taya trying to communicate, and you did like a telepathy thing for a bit.
Yes, but like without metagaming, which I was like sometimes as a player, I do have a tendency to just be like, oh, I've made the connection. It's like, well, you can't make that leap of logic because you don't know the other thing. But this game, I was like, no, I'm going to set it up so that we can communicate because I know that this is going to be a sneaky thing.
Yeah.
And then playing a class that is like inherently psychic, I was like, all right, link. We can all communicate telepathically. There's 3 of us. Yeah.
Right? So what does it mean to be a good player in a D&D sense as like an overall summary of what we've said so far?
Being prepared, engaged both before you play the game during setup and then during actual play, right? That's part of what makes tabletop RPGs kind of funny is unlike a video game where you don't really have to think about it and you can sit down and jump back in. It does take a little bit of like time before you play that you need to be like, okay, what did we learn last time, right? Where are we? What are we doing? And also like, where's my character, right? Where emotionally is this person?
Yeah.
Because that's a wild thing you never have to ask yourself about a video game character.
Yeah. So you have to be self-aware, game-aware, and character-aware.
Yes.
Basically, be aware.
Yeah. And
beware.
Beware. But it's good. I mean, it shows a level of like dedication that is really like thrilling to play with, right? Like I think when we talk about, and I mean we broadly the tabletop RPG community, we talk about different shows that we like as models for games we want to play. And then sometimes I know that it can feel frustrating to not like engage with that same like feeling of like a complete game. But then if you look at like, if you examine what you and your other players are doing at the table versus what, you know, players on those shows are doing, well, first of all, they're inherently different. One is like very curated, you know, like
these are
well
actors.
prepped. These are like professionals doing a professional thing, right? Versus your friends in your basement. You know, in like the 80s sense.
They get paid for this.
They get paid. Like they get paid for this. But if you just look at like what is happening at the table, well, no one's like checking their phone, you know, and I'm not saying like phones are the inherent evil, but like
no one is
distracted.
To call myself out, nobody's on Reddit.
No one's on Reddit. Yeah. Nobody is actively trying to disengage from the table, right? Everybody is so into it, and that's what allows those big like role play moments that we all want to happen, right? And even in those shows, you'll watch them stumble into it and then realize what's happening, and then push for it. Keep saying like yes and using improv strategies. If I have a piece of advice, like maybe take an improv class. I'm not saying you have to, but if you don't have a background in theater, if that's not something you understand, go try it maybe, right? Or go watch some videos about how to be a good improviser and start trying that.
Yeah. Also, I'll throw this in for people who live in big cities. Most universities have clubs or organizations on campus for things like improv that are community members can join at low cost because it's primarily for students, and community members joining enrich the scenario. I know, like, I've run a debate club on campus where, a community member can join for like $10 extra.
Yeah.
If they want to debate. That's it. It's just a small extra fee because you're technically not a student.
Yeah.
Right? It's stuff like that.
Yeah, it's seeking out the opportunity to try to be a better player.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of examples of how do you be a better player in the sense of D&D. So I kind of want to switch now and talk about some of that course material that I mentioned for how to be a better player when talking about motivation.
Right.
So I need to give a quick reminder of previous content we've talked about. In a previous episode, we talked about what types of players are there, and we summarized them using 4 terms. I'm going to kind of modify those terms here so I can talk with them a little bit more in a 2015 research sense rather than a 1990 research sense. We had achievers, people who's primarily trying to achieve goals, speed run, reach endpoints, get cool items, stuff like that. We had explorers, which you can also call free spirits, people whose whole thing is exploring, learning new things, seeing new things.
Yeah.
Right?
Breaking the game to find the corners.
Breaking the game we're going to get into.
Yeah.
The next group is socializers, people who are fundamentally focused on the social aspect of game, interacting with other players, right? And then the final one we called killers. I'm going to change these names up. So the term that we now use is more disruptor, people who disrupt the game. And I actually still don't like that term. So I'm going to call them changers. There are people whose primary focus is change, whether it be chaotic or positive. Their goal is to change what's happening.
Okay.
Right? They like new things occurring in response to their actions directly. That's their big motivator.
So they're huge on like choices matter games.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's 2 more categories that we need to throw into this discussion, though. The first is philanthropists. I hate this term, but it's people who are driven by value.
Okay.
Right? So they fundamentally want to do good things, see good things, or have good things happen. Right?
Okay.
They're not always inherently going to be good.
Yeah, morally good.
But it's to do actions that to them have purpose. They want a sense of purpose.
Sure.
Or a sense of value or meaning from their actions.
Right.
Right? And the final group is simply what we call the player,
Fun.
which sounds wild, but it's people who are driven by external motivation,
Okay.
right? So they don't have an internal reason. They just like rewards.
Yeah.
That's it.
We're
External
just
rewards.
we're playing a game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about like design theory and how we design games or design products that take game features, we talk about motivation using something called self-determinism theory. Found the source. It's self-determination theory in HCI Games Research, current uses and open questions by April Tyak and Elisa D. Meckler from 2020.
Cool.
Look anything up loosely like that, you should find it. I'm also going to quickly jump in with my gamification reference. We're also going to be talking about factors to consider for tailored gamifications, which is a research paper from a bunch of people, one of them whose last name is Halifax,
Great.
which is cool.
You know, hey, sidebar. People from Halifax are called Haligonians. I think that rules.
That is,
It's such a good name.
I love and hate that at the same time.
I really like it. I like that there's a strong G in there, and for no reason. It's great.
Yeah. So how do we motivate people? How do you as a player get motivated? Well,
Are we asking me, the
yeah, do you
player?
want to give some input? Like what motivates you?
Hey, we've talked about this before. I love a game where I'm exploring and learning new things, right? One of my favorite things. I think, games that I like fundamentally have aspects of being like rewarding to that kind of sense of like what's around the corner, what's next, what's over here, what did I miss, right? What happens if I do this? Does something different happen?
Yeah,
right?
it's this feeling of, if I can use one of our keywords,
Sure.
autonomy.
Yeah.
Right? Having choices and being free. Right?
Yeah.
Feeling like you are an autonomous being, basically, in a
Yep.
system.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when it comes to motivations, we can separate this into two categories. External, which is basically give you rewards. You can break this up into like you want rewards or you want to get approval from others.
This is the external versus internal.
Yeah.
Or no, sorry, extrinsic versus intrinsic.
Yeah.
Like modes of reward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's 4 categories for extrinsic that I'll just quickly run through, and that's fully external, which is just you do thing, I give you thing,
Yay.
right? Or you don't do thing and I take away thing,
Oh no.
right? The next level is we call this introjected. So this is an internal motivator that's based on external reality.
Yeah.
So this is you might be avoiding shame or guilt by doing this action, or you might
cool.
be looking for approval from others. This is still fundamentally external, but you have an inner reason now. It's
That's
not
cool.
just rewards.
I hadn't considered that.
Yeah. The
Yeah.
next level is identified. The previous one was called introjected, which is
Yeah.
weird. Identified would be something like it's the same as above, but you also have some value in the action.
Okay.
Like, not only are you trying to avoid shame or get approval, but you also think this action on its own is worth doing, but you care about that approval more.
Okay.
And the final level we'll call integrated, which is where all of your internal and intrinsic motivations apply here, and you're getting rewards at the same time.
Oh, so this is just all of the above.
Yeah, this is a mixture.
Wholesale, I like all the stuff.
Yes.
Nice.
So when we talk about intrinsic motivation, what are the motivators for people? And we can break these up into 3 fundamental and then 1 extra. I wrote an exam on this just yesterday. This is very practiced.
You're like, I've got this.
Yeah.
Fun. So once again, it's the Vi quiz show where I just try to imagine what the correct answers are based
you're
on
usually
nothing.
right.
Well, that's fun.
Right? Because you're an inherently intelligent person.
So okay, hang on. Let's put this to the test. Now I must be wrong. Can I use examples of like in-game things that
Yeah.
you could?
So we've actually already talked about one of them.
Yeah.
One major fundamental motivator for people is a feeling of control or
Right.
autonomy.
Okay.
So there's 3 others.
3 others. I like. Quiz show, my favorite. I'm gonna say like physical rewards, right? Getting the new set of armor, the next sword.
Well, that's external. So we're just
Are
talking
we talking
internal.
about just internal? Okay.
So yeah, we're
hang on.
moving into, we now understand external, like rewards, getting things, not being shamed.
Yeah.
So internally, what are motivators inside for people to do things?
Would one of these be something like relationship building, like understanding another person, or like being rewarded by a character interaction?
Yeah.
Okay.
So this topic is called relatedness. This is a basic psychological need, like
Yeah.
the autonomy, the feeling of control. This feeling of relatedness is some people want social connections or cordial connections, or they don't want to be disconnected from others. They like this feeling of connection and interaction.
Sure.
Right? So relatedness is a basic psychological need that you can gain, that can motivate you to do certain actions.
Okay,
So we've
cool.
now got 2.
Yeah. Okay. That one to me is also like playing along with the bit, right? Like somebody puts something on the table and you're like, ooh, you know what? I wouldn't do that, but it's way funnier if I do because it's going to make my friend laugh. That's this.
Yeah.
Okay. 2 more. Okay. So we like, what do we have right now? Sorry. We
have autonomy and we have relatedness.
Okay. I want to say something in here about like initiative. Initiative feels a lot like
That's
autonomy. Yeah. I want a hint. I'd like a hint, please. Can I phone a friend?
Okay. Why would you replay a game?
For a deeper level of like knowing, of understanding. Like there's like an unearthing that happens.
Yep, that's part of it. We could also give the exact same thing of why do people practice games?
Oh, to be more competent, to be better at it. Okay, so there's a skill level here.
Yeah.
Okay.
The next category is called mastery.
Oh, okay.
Right?
Neat.
It's a basic psychological need. The feeling that you're good at something, that you can achieve your goals, that if you set your mind to something, you can do it. Mm-hmm. That's mastery.
Right.
You can also call this competence, but that feels degrading to me.
This is the opposite of somebody yelling skill issue at you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Skill gained.
Skill gained.
So mastery is another basic psychological
achievement
need.
unlocked. Yeah.
So we've actually covered the three fundamental basic psychological needs that can motivate you.
Yeah.
But there's an extra category that's almost a basic need that I think is still worth talking about.
But isn't quite a basic need?
Yeah. I mean, you might think it's a basic need. I did when I first read it.
Now I want to kind of take a left turn here and just say that it's like something like fun. Like just like the idea of like kind of screwing around.
You're on the right track.
Okay. There's like a playful kind of like exploration
Fun
level.
is one of the many ways of achieving this.
Oh gosh. Serotonin. I'm not really like 100% sure like what word would encompass the idea that I'm thinking about, but just the idea of like feeling like you're engaging with something that you enjoy doing and knowing that it's enjoyable. I don't know. Yeah.
So
I feel like all of those things like
this.
feed into
Yeah, that's a huge part of this, but the term that we would use is more broad. We would say value.
Oh,
right?
okay,
cool.
That
what you're doing has value to you or others.
Okay,
right? Yeah. It could be philanthropic, where it's value to other people around you that you're giving them value, or you're receiving value.
This is where I was going with play. I was like, it's like something that is rewarding to you, which is inherently value.
Yeah. So, value here. Help is a bit of a complicated word for this, and this is a very abstract thing for people. But when you're playing games, when you're interacting with systems, you're motivated by self-determination theory, if you subscribe to that theory, which again, we're in a research area now, so there's a lot of disagreement here.
We're literally just talking about something you wrote an exam about. Like, we are in the academic space. Yeah.
So
we're over here in the ivory tower with our little wizard hats on.
And I'm no expert in this. We had an expert in this come on the show. That was Scott Bateman, who came on before. But
hey, Scott, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Yeah. But the 4 things people value are feeling competent or having mastery over something.
Right.
They want relatedness. Mm-hmm. They want autonomy, this sense of control, and they want value from it. This is what motivates them. What decisions they make is up to them as a person.
Yeah.
But you can probably break down what led to that decision as who they are as a person and which of these motivators are they pulling from.
One of my very good friends is really, really fun to play Baldur's Gate with because he's played it a lot. But because we're doing a run where I'm like learning there's like stuff that I missed, which is wild for me as an explorer, where I'm like, what do you mean you can do that? Right? What do you mean that there's a way to get that person to join your party? Crazy. One of the best things about playing with them is that they find joy in showing me the new experience. Right? It's a very like generous way to play.
Yeah.
Of like, this isn't in like
they get value from sharing this with you.
Exactly. Like it's not something that they don't need to be like selfish about the experiences. They're like, you should go do this dialogue.
And the sharing with you is also very gives that sense of relatedness.
Yes. They are also the meanest person I've ever met. There's something you can do in the Dark Urge campaign where you like befriend somebody and then your Dark Urge takes over and you murder them in the middle of the night. And they didn't warn me about it. They were like, you should go talk to this person. And I was like, they're so fun. I like them. I didn't know you could have them in your party. And then instantly, like, behead them. And I was like, hey, hang on. And, like, through Discord, like, I could hear them laughing so hard that they were, like, clipping their mic. I was like, that's mean. But again, like, they're finding a lot of fun in making sure that that I, as another player, am, like, enjoying the game as well.
If we want to use multiple of these terms at once, they've mastered the game, which was a motivation for them to play so much. But now, by playing it with you after mastery, they're gaining this relatedness with you and the sense of value in sharing something with you.
Oh, yeah. And it's actually way more fun as a game than to play it by myself. Like, it's the kind of thing where I'm now, like, waiting until we can play instead of furthering my other save. I'm like, yeah, that's fun. I get it. The game will end at some point. I will get through it and, like, do the rest of the quests and stuff. But no, I want to play with this person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if we can kind of expand upon this for motivators and how to be a good player, because we will pull back to that. I mentioned there were 6 types of players before. So we can run through them now and say, oh, if you find that you care about one of these 4 motivators more, you might already know what type of player you are, right? Yeah. We've mentioned achievers. What are they driven by? Mastery.
Yeah, mastery.
Right?
Yeah.
They want to master something, learn new things, improve themselves, overcome challenges.
These are the Breath of the Wild.
I'm quoting Connor Wilson from UNB again at this point.
These are the Breath of the Wild players, or like any video game really, who you're watching them like understand the glitches in the game and then like use them to do crazy stuff, and it's like, well, that's not how the game works, but I'm really cool that you found that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The next category you might think is if you care a lot about autonomy and self-expression, you're a free spirit or an explorer, right? You want to create, to explore, to be creative in general.
These are people who have just played the character builder screens and
and
the
or
first
the artists,
couple of
the
interactions.
cosplayers.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Right? They express themselves in new ways. They like to follow their own schedule. Again, quoting the notes from Connor Wilson. I need to say that because this is a course, right?
Yeah, but these are also like some of my favorite people because they will do art of characters, right? Like we've talked about how engaging with a game can make it better for everybody. But if you're the kind of person who's like, I'm going to draw the party, that's so good. Everybody else invests immediately because you just drew the thing that I've put all of my brain energy into, right? I've had little Blorbo up there, right? Just been thinking about what kind of boots they wear. You know what I mean? Like that's where I'm at. And you just went and drew them in the silly little outfit that I've designed. Crazy. I now want to play more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you're driven by relatedness, this interaction with other people before, you're
very,
a socializer.
Very rewarded.
Right?
Yeah.
You are a socializer user type, right? You value interactions with others, building new social connections. Like, being social is a term here, but this doesn't mean necessarily with people. This can be with NPCs. This can be with your impact in games. These are the type of people who love story-driven games, right? These are the type of people who like to read Lord of the Rings, because that's fundamentally what Lord of the Rings is about.
Yeah.
Right? If you are driven by value or meaning or purpose, right, you're a philanthropist. I can't say that word. I think that's how you say it. Philanthropist.
You're right. At no point here was I like, that's incorrect.
I have said it. I've been saying it wrong for a week, and Taya, who's been on this show, has been laughing at me.
Oh,
right? But as a philanthropist, as a player type, those driven by value want to help others or create a more rewarding experience. They might get a rewarding experience out of it. My notes here say they're not expecting rewards or payoffs, but they still might get rewards by creating the sense of value, right? And what are the last 2 types? So I need to talk about these last 2 types because these are kind of fun. If you find that none of these apply to you, but you like getting rewards, you like seeing bars go up or getting new items.
If you're the kind of person who would play an idle game just to watch the bars go.
Yeah. Or if you just like playing games and getting cool new things, and it's not like any of these things, you will do any of them if it leads to just enjoying more game.
And again, not inherently like greedy. It's not about the stuff.
Yeah, no, this is just like, if none of these speak to you in particular, you just like experiencing a game and getting things in the game, or like seeing new things, just you generally enjoy games with no specific motivation, you might be a player, right? Which a player is driven by external rewards, the whole thing we're talking about before, right? Now there's multiple subtypes for this. If you're a player who likes mastery, you might be called a consumer, which is a hilarious term that I've found in the research. But if you like socializing, you might be a networker, right? So players like to do things for a reward, but they might still prefer certain things. They're just reward driven.
Definitely.
Right? I think everybody to some degree is reward driven, but that doesn't necessarily mean you're strictly a player.
Yeah.
Right?
And again, like if you don't slot into one of these categories, it's because the human experience is wide and ever changing.
Yeah.
And if you don't have to put yourself in a box, don't.
Yeah. And the last type was the changer. I'm gonna call them the changer, right? Which is actually, this whole theory that we just talked about doesn't apply to changers. Everything we've just said doesn't apply to them. If you just like chaos, or you like change or you like impacting the world around you and seeing the impact of your actions, right? You would be a changer. And there's multiple types of changers. If you're a changer who likes impacting others, the term that we use is influencer, which is hilarious.
That's good and doesn't worry me at all.
But if you're someone who likes change, who's driven by value, right? The term that's used in the research is griefer. And I don't agree with that term.
I like that one.
I like that term. But I think causing change driven by your values could also be the revolutionary.
Griefer is like a very like Mistborn-esque like character class.
I think of Minecraft.
I just
what
like
if I blew up your Minecraft house?
I will be sad. don't
I'm doing
do
the
that.
finger tapping
finger
thing.
tap to me. What if we blew up our Minecraft houses?
But
yeah.
The reason why we went on this whole tangent, it's been 25 or 15 minutes of just talking about this, right? Why? Because if you being a good player doesn't just mean building a good environment for those around you. Everything we've said about engaging with the game, asking questions, helping others, taking notes, being aware, these are all inherently aspects that are driven by value, fundamentally, right? All of these other aspects of like self-determination theory and of motivation come into play, but inherently it's philanthropy, it's value, creating a more valuable situation. But by understanding what motivates you, you can engage with that motivation to give a better game for those around you and yourself. If you find that you love socialization, you're the role play guy in the group.
Yeah.
If you are an explorer, you might explore aspects of the game and the game world. You might be the person who works with the DM to build maps or to come up with new languages or to understand cultures. I did that with you in your own game. I wrote a PDF.
And like one of the things that's great about people being like, this is why I really like to do world building with the group that I'm going to play with as a DM. Like sitting down and doing, hey, we're going to draw the map, right? I did this with one of my favorite games ever of like, okay, here, whiteboard. Everybody, like, you know, we're going to kind of play. Well, not like you.
Yeah, our first session, you pulled out a big piece of paper and said, draw map.
Draw map.
Everybody draw their section.
Yeah.
You're from there if you want to be.
Yeah. Well, and it's the thing of like, well, now you are thinking about the place and like why your character is from there, right? Because you have a little bit of ownership of the area, right? It feels very different to know where you're from and why you're from there when you made it versus just being told that that's the way that place is, right?
Yeah.
Oh, well, if you're that, you might be from here. It's like, well, okay, well, that's interesting, but you don't have like an inherent understanding. You don't have that like underlying through line to understand it, like genuinely what am I trying to say here, Gaia? There's another level that is deeper.
Yes.
You're trying to understand it.
You're achieving depth.
Yes. Wow, it's depth versus complexity.
Every episode,
depth versus complexity.
I love that this show could be summarized as depth versus complexity.
And we talk about it for 2 whole seasons.
Oh, you're not wrong.
Okay, sorry, but the thing that I'm trying to say is I really enjoyed doing that to let characters and players build the world with me to buy in, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's important that also players are fundamentally capable of changing the world, right? Your choices need to matter, but they need to have a visual impact, right? If you choose not to save that kid from, I don't know, the fire from the dragon, if you fail at something, there should be a consequence for it. And as a player, I think it's also important that you understand where you're like. I kind of want to come back to what do you do at the table to be a good player? And I think once you understand what kind of player you are, the next step is to make sure that you engage with your other players and characters at the table to understand what like they enjoy, but also to just give them the opportunity to do that. And I'm gonna pull out the book again, but James Mateo calls this like giving and taking focus. I'm just gonna give like an example that he has in the book here. So taking focus would be something like I use a net arrow to make the person falling stick safely to the wall of the building, versus giving focus of I fire an arrow into the wall so that Spring-Heeled Jack can jump off it to catch the falling civilian. Right? So this is the idea that you can do an action which does a thing, or you can do an action to give another character the ability to do something. This is beyond like buff spells and things like that. It is the idea that you are creating an opportunity for somebody else to jump in. Yeah. And there's lots of stuff like this, but making sure that you are giving the ability for like other players to have an opportunity to change is very important. So like when we're talking about like being eyes up at the table, I think that also means being able to step back. That doesn't mean you dominate the table necessarily, but just saying like what makes the game move, right? If you're driven by the story, if you understand that that's the thing that you're here to create with your friends, then you're having like a much better experience than just sort of going, what can I do? What's the next action I make?
What can we do?
What can we do? Yeah.
Is the big one.
Is the big one.
So I just pulled up my results from when I did the player test for which of the 6 types am I.
Yes.
And I don't think you're going to be surprised by this, Vi. My results, there's some really close together ones. I'm just going to list my top 3 that were actually significant. So first up, for my player type, I got philanthropist, driven by value, right?
The one you can't say.
Yes.
Yeah.
Which is hilarious.
Very good.
But this shouldn't be surprising either, because I'm like fundamentally I enjoy being a DM, creating that sense of value for others, right? It shouldn't be surprising that the DM is the person driven by value. That's just inherent, right? The second one for me is achiever, and that should not be surprising.
Yeah.
Actually, I'm shocked that achiever's second, because I was fully expecting it at first.
I'm not at all.
I thought achiever was going to be first, fundamentally.
Yeah. How different are they? Do you get a percent?
Yeah, so it's out of, if you are 100% being, what percent of you is each type? I am 24 philanthropist and 22 achiever.
Oh,
and then
so close.
19 free spirit.
So you just like games.
Well, if I just liked games, I'd be a player, but I'm only 14 player, which that's far enough. That's 10% now down, so I don't care about that. Like player and socializer are both 14, and then disruptor is 7, right? So I'm just going to turn my laptop around if I can see it for like an example. So I'm very much...
I like that you're not at all a disruptor. You're not interested at all in, like, changing.
I love change, but I think the issue is a lot of research still phrases disruptor as pretty negatively, right? So I think if you were to phrase it in the positive, you like seeing change, I think that would go up. I don't think it'd be my top 3 still.
You think you're just biased because of the way that it was phrased in this test?
I think so.
Reasonable.
But I think even then, like, it wouldn't hit anywhere near my top, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, like, it's interesting to study these motivations, and sorry for kind of jumping in with that. But
no, we're all good. We're kind of bouncing around today, which I actually really am enjoying.
Nice.
Yeah, it's kind of nice to just talk about like what makes a game, like this is the heart of our show, right? What makes a game good comes down to people making things, people making choices, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot to be said for this show being kind of a model for that, right? We both bring some stuff to the table. We do an amount of prep sometimes, right? Or we just give opportunity for the other person to be involved, right? And then we just have a little bit of time to do that, to engage with the thing that we're interested in. And then, we move on, right? But like, I think any relationship, and especially stuff that is like framed around RPGs, is that you understand that it's cyclical and changeable, especially that your PC should be somebody who can change and who should change, right? If at, the trope of like character from the beginning of the series walks across a bridge or something, and then same character from the end of the series walks the other way, like past them, those people should be very different. They should be changed by the experiences you're putting at the table. If the person you started with is the same, like if you do this visualization in your head of like season 7 version of this character and season 1 version of this character, and they're identical, you haven't played to change. It's way more interesting always to have a character who's dynamic, right?
Oh, of course.
This is a basic writing thing, right? But I think as a player, if you always have that in your mind of I'm playing to see who this person becomes, is really important. And sometimes that means starting with a character who's like fundamentally very flawed.
Vi, I wonder if you would happen to be a changer.
I don't know.
Suddenly.
Yeah, I don't know. That's kind of scary. Scary. It's not really. It's fine.
It's interesting.
It would
interesting
be a wild.
To perceive you.
I don't like being perceived. Yeah, but I think also like hero's journey is important here.
Yeah, most definitely.
Like that's if you know a little bit about that, we don't need to go into that. But
But I think overall, if we can kind of just give a good summary as well, how do you be a good player? Let's answer the question. We've spent 50 minutes talking about
around it. Yeah.
Yeah. And like I have tons of stories here. Like I like we have a friend who I think is very obviously driven by this disruptor or changer class. Remember Taya? I ran a D&D game where it was a Christmas themed game one with no fighting, and they were doing a snowball fight and she was worried about losing, and so she summoned a storm that nearly killed someone. And then she literally got smited by a god for it and had to roll a new character.
Fun.
Like I just insta killed her as a DM.
Unfortunate.
But like I warned her it would happen, and she still did it. And she was like, this is a very fun engagement. It did make the game more fun for everyone else.
Yeah.
And she came up with a new character who was less mean, right?
Yeah.
But it was fun.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, that's an example of, like, if you're playing to change and you make a character who fundamentally doesn't change and they die, hey, that's also a change.
But on the other hand, they caused pure chaos and everybody laughed about it. And she just had a new character and they kept playing.
Yeah, low-stakes game.
Right? Yeah. And because there was a god overseeing the whole thing, the god just kind of stopped the target from being hurt, right?
I think this comes back to, like, how you deal with challenges at the table. Right? Like when the GM puts something in your way, right? Do you like brush by it or do you engage with it?
She engaged with it to the grave.
To the grave. Yeah, but I think it might be an example, but I do want to pull another one from the book. Here, so this is the idea about like when there's like being a good player is also engaging with your GM as a player, right? Even though you like as a GM, you are fundamentally kind of playing a different game as the players, knowing that you're not an antagonist with this other person at the table, right? Still knowing that this is collaborative. We're making
players.
A game together. You are also playing, even though you're not a quote unquote player. Comes to like understanding that the challenges aren't personal, right? And should feed how the story changes. So real quick, the 3 columns here are rejecting challenge and accepting challenge, and then sort of the analysis of it. So rejecting challenge. The DM says, no one has ever come out of the Doom Maze alive. The PC says, oh good, looks like we're finally allowed to go in. I thought we'd have to sign a waiver. It's like, wow, okay. And you can kind of feel that stops the game in its tracks, right? If you're a GM and your player responds that way, you're going to be like, okay. I mean, that was a fun little thing that I threw. I thought that would be interesting, right? Here's accepting challenge. No one has ever come out of the Doom Maze alive. I look at the door and back to the gatekeeper. I am Captain Vale. I just want to be sure you remember in case I forget to tell you when we come back out, right? You have engaged with what the GM has put in front of you, but you've also offered a little bit more to NPCs and to other players about who your character is. Right? If you respond that way, and it's so simple, right? So in example 1, this is again from the book, but the PC dismisses the threat of the Doom Maze, establishes the character won't care when they succeed, right? It doesn't matter. Like the outcome doesn't matter because you didn't put any weight into it. You have no stakes. Example 2 establishes that that the character understands the Doom Maze is a threat, is confident they'll succeed, and their success will matter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how do you be a good player?
You engage with everybody at the table,
you understand
including your
what
GM.
you want, you understand what other people want, and you work to get that.
Yes.
And you don't play against who you are. I think we've talked a lot about the good things you can do. This is about having fun. Yeah. If you're not the type to do deep exploration and the game needs it, sure, you could force yourself, but you might not have fun. Yeah. Instead, if there's someone else at the table who could be good at it but needs a helping hand, be the philanthropist.
Be the helper.
Help them. Yeah. Get them in a position to do the exploring, because then you get to do the thing you like, they do the thing they like in a shared game, and you're both benefiting because of it.
This reminds me of the game that we played really recently that, we're playing with people we've never, I think ever played D&D with before.
I barely know these two.
Yeah. And so it was just something that happened in a Discord server that we're part of, where it was like friends of friends, and we were like, oh yeah, let's put a game together. And we just months ago made characters and did some backstory stuff, and then we played 3 weeks ago. Yeah. And we just opened up, we just jumped right in, and this game worked so well because everybody was so engaged at the table and like interested to understand who these new people in our lives were, to be like, oh, what is happening here? Who are you? Like, it was the really good, like, you all meet in a tavern, except it's a 1950s ice cream store, which is great.
I also I couldn't understand what the DM was trying to ask me to do, so I did not engage until like after the ice cream store scene. But then after I figured it out, I was in. Yeah,
exactly, right? But it's again like opportunity to just be like, oh, wild. Like, one of the things that really blew me away is like, sometimes as a player character, you have a sad little backstory that you've made, right? But sometimes you don't get the chance to like actually drop this thing that you've been thinking about. And I remember just being like, okay, that probably won't come up. It's just something for me to know. And then one of the other characters just asked. They're like, so what's your deal? And I was like, right. How do I answer this? Because it would be so cool if people understood like where this character is coming from, right? Like, just such a good way to play. And it doesn't take that much work to just ask the question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that covers pretty much everything.
Yeah.
So, how to be a good player? Engage with what you find fun and ensure that others can as well.
Yeah.
And make sure you're putting in the work to have that fun.
I'm going to add on to this. If you're a GM, you're also a player. This applies to
you too.
Yeah.
Thank you all for listening. Any last comments, Vi?
Buy this book, The Ultimate RPG Gameplay Guide by James DiMatteo. It's great.
Thank you so much. I hope you all have a good one. Bye. And that's it for today's episode. But what if you wanted to listen to more? Well, our new episodes come out every Thursday at 9 p.m. Atlantic, and there are 3 different ways that you can listen. If you're in the Fredericton area of New Brunswick, Canada, you can listen live on CHSR 97.9 FM through any of your radio services. If you're not in this region or you prefer using the internet, you can tune in on chsrfm.ca at the same time, 9 p.m. Atlantic. As well, we release all of our episodes on a number of podcasting platforms online, including Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. So if you wanted to, you could go back right now and listen to Season 1, where Vi and I do a deep dive into the fundamental concepts of game design, rather than the hardware they'll be taking up this season. Anyways, thank you for listening, and have a good one.